And you're up, Derek.
All right, thanks, Gary. There's a couple of reasons I wanted to give this talk today. One is because the state's been doing a lot of work with horseshoe crabs, so I want to highlight some of that work. The other reason is because there's a lot of misinformation around horseshoe crabs, specifically the population levels and the impact of the biomedical fishery. So I'm going to address that as well. So some of the things I'm going to say today will kind of contradict some of the things you've probably seen in the media, which is why the title of this talk is The Truth, the Whole Truth, Nothing But the Truth, because I feel like I have to go under oath to talk about it. Why is there a biomedical fishery? It's to produce limitless amoebocyte lysate, or LAL. It's a product made from horseshoe crab blood. They'll take about 30% of the crab's blood, put it in jars like those there, centrifuge it, separate the plasma from the amoebocyte cells, pour off the plasma, take the amoebocyte cells, lyse them, and extract a protein from those amoebocyte cells. That's the raw material needed to make LAL. It was discovered by researchers in Massachusetts in Woods Hole in the 1960s. They saw that horseshoe crab blood clots when exposed to gram-negative bacteria. Examples of gram-negative bacteria include Vibrio, E. coli, and Salmonella. The LAL test replaced the rabbit test. Prior to LAL, they take a rabbit, inject it with a sample, and see if it developed a fever. The LAL test is much more accurate and much more sensitive. It's an FDA-approved test. There are synthetic versions that have been developed, but not fully approved in the United States yet. LAL is a test for products that contain the contact the human bloodstream, so things like vaccines, IVs, implants, medical devices, antibiotics, and much more. The impacts of LAL is it reduces the likelihood of bacterial contamination. Contamination can cause fever or in extreme cases, death. It reduces vaccine hesitancy. It can also be used to test for fungal infections. Google horseshoe crab in biomedical, a number of articles will pop up. Most of them are all bad. This one from NPR, coastal biomedical firms are bleeding more horseshoe crabs with little accountability. From the Washington Post, 2021, horseshoe crab's blood is vital in testing drugs. Critics say it endangers the ancient creature. From The Guardian, horseshoe crabs endangered by biomedical bloodletting. And this one from Popular Mechanics, this crab's blood is the reason you're alive. Biomedical companies are bleeding more than 500,000 crabs every year. Can this creature's been around since the dinosaurs be saved? All implying that horseshoe crabs are dwindling and being the cause of that is because of the biomedical firms. Closer to home, from Wicked Local, hats off to the horseshoe crab. The endangered horseshoe crab is a good excuse for a beach party from noon to 2 this Friday at Nelson's Beach. I should probably stop here and say that horseshoe crabs are not endangered. Not at the state level, not at the federal level. The IUCN does list them as vulnerable. For context, they also list cod, haddock, and spiny dogfish at the same level. This article from BUR, NPR from 2021, horseshoe crab blood is vital in vaccine development, but they're starting to disappear. This more recent one from a few months ago from BUR, horseshoe crabs spawn under Massachusetts new protections. The first line under the audio link says horseshoe crab numbers are at historic lows in Massachusetts. The first line from the print article from that article is horseshoe crabs are not endangered or threatened in Massachusetts, which is true, but their numbers are at historic lows. That part is not true. So we have a number of surveys that are done in the state. We have a spawning beach survey. 80 to 90% of our spawning beach surveys are on increasing trends over the last 10 years. That's based on either a Mann-Kendall or linear model. 35% are statistically significant. There are none that are statistically significant and decreasing. We also have a SANE survey. The SANE survey hasn't had a data point below the time series median in a decade. We also have a trawl survey. The trawl survey is used in the stock assessments. The 2019 and 2024 stock assessments both say that horseshoe crab numbers in this state have increased since 1998, when horseshoe crab management first started. Those documents are approved by every single state and federal horseshoe crab biologist on the East Coast. Also, the IUCN also says that horseshoe crabs in this state are also increasing. So these articles are wrong and pretty much egregiously wrong, but this is what the public sees. They don't read the stock assessments, they read these, which is a problem. The history of biomedical harvest in Massachusetts. It's happened here for 50 years, so what better place to look at the impact of biomedical harvest than right here? Associates Cape Cod opened in 1974 and has been hand harvesting from Pleasant Bay for 50 years. Pleasant Bay is that red area there. It's closed to bait harvest, has been since 2006. It's only open to biomedical harvest. It's an opportunity to look at long-term impacts of biomedical harvest in that region. In 2022, Charles River Labs also opened a facility in Massachusetts on Cape Cod. At that point in time, conservationists were very concerned about having 2 facilities in the state. So they wanted us to do more sampling of that fishery. At the same time, the LAL manufacturers also requested more sampling because they were concerned about misinformation about their fishery and practices. So we have been. I'll get more into that later. Part of this story is data confidentiality. The data is confidential at the local level because of state and federal rule of 3 laws. So basically, if there's only 1 or 2 companies, we can't release the data. In Massachusetts, for a while, we only had 1 company, ACC, so we could not release the data. This is problematic for my job because it hinders transparency in the stock assessments. So the last stock assessment, we had these companies here, ACC, Lumili Labs, Lonza, Fujifilm Waco, and CRL. We wanted to release the data for the Mid-Atlantic because it's population models for the Mid-Atlantic region. So that'd be those 3 spots there, Lumili, Lonza, and Fujifilms. But if we did that, it would expose ACC and Charles River. If you subtract the 3 in the middle, ACC would know what Charles River is doing, and Charles River would know what ACC was doing. So we could not release the data at the local level, but we could release it at the coast-wide level, and that's what's done every single year. So data is released annually by ASMC at the coast-wide level. More recently, there's been some new firms come about. Charles River expanded into Mass and Virginia, and Martin Fish Company opened in Maryland. So now with Maryland having 3 companies, they are now releasing their data. So each facility reports by month, number purchased by sex, number of crabs bled by sex, number rejected by sex, number dead by sex. They're also required to allow state biologists to collect data. DMF has been going to the lab since 2000 and increased sampling in 2022 to include all stages of harvest. This is the coast-wide data. The first column there is the year from 2010 to 2023. The number of crabs collected, that has more than doubled over time, especially the last couple of years. The number of crabs bled has also more than doubled. Post-bleeding mortality, the middle column there, is a 15% estimate based on the number of crabs bled. That's based on published literature. I'll get into more of that later. Observed mortality is the number of crabs that are reported by the biomedical firms during the process that die before bleeding. And total mortality there is the number of crabs that are observed dead during the process and post-bleeding mortality. From that, you get a range from about 50,000 crabs to about 180,000 crabs. The number is increasing. So what's the impact of the population at that level? Turns out, not much. Figure on the left is number of millions of female crabs. Figure on the right is millions of male crabs. The y-axis is millions of crabs. X-axis is year. The blue line is with no biomedical data included, so no mortality. The red line is including biomedical mortality coast-wide, so applying all coast-wide mortality to just the Delaware Bay region. You can see those lines are right on top of each other, so it really doesn't make a difference at all in population estimates. Population estimates have about tripled over the last 15 years. But it seems like biomedical doesn't really have much of an impact on population there, which makes sense because the mortality level at that for the biomedical is about 50,000 to 180,000 per year. When you're talking about tens of millions of crabs, it doesn't really move the needle. So what about closer to home? There's a lot more crabs in Delaware Bay than there is here, which was the northern extent of their range. So what's the impact here? We have a spawning survey in the state, and there's a few sites that are done in the Outer Cape where there's been a long-term history of biomedical harvest. So what does that look like? This is Marsh 2-3, which is in Pleasant Bay. There's a 50-year time period of harvest in this area. The y-axis is female density, number of females per 25 square meters from the spawning survey. X-axis is year. There's 2 data sources here. One's from URI, the JP, that's James Perry. Her research there was done in Pleasant Bay using the same methods that are currently used by Mass Audubon. And what you see here is that the numbers have not decreased at all. They've actually increased. The blue dashed line is the time series median, which is about just under 1. Recent years have been about 3 times that. So we're not really seeing a decline there at all. We're seeing an increase. This spot here, Arcus Beach, is also in Pleasant Bay. The 2 highest data points from this time series are the first 2, 08 and 09. So we are seeing a little bit of decrease here, but not really by much. It kind of bounces around after that 2010 period. This is in Nauset, Priscilla's Landing. Again, another increase. Last several years above the time series median. So how do those sites compare to other sites that we survey? These are the other sites. This is for 2024, the density of females in the survey. Turns out those sites compare pretty well. Even after 50 years of biomedical harvest, these are the best sites in the state. Marsh 2-3 has about 5 times the next highest female density of any other spot we survey. Those sites are not surveyed at night. You can't really see the comparison there. But basically, we have a lot of biomedical harvest in Outer Cape Cod. We now recently have more in Nantucket Sound with the addition of the second biomedical firm. Traditionally, bait harvest came from Nantucket Sound. About 80% of the bait harvest comes from Nantucket Sound. So now looking at spawning records, that last one was just from 2024. So this one's looking at all years combined, looking at the dates with the most crabs from one survey. So one walk down the beach. Again, you can see the best spots in the state are those spots in the Outer Cape, even after 50 years of harvest, sometimes by a wide margin. That March 2-3 site gets a lot of crabs. That's just one walk down the beach. This is looking at the published biomedical mortality papers. There's quite a range here. First column is the author of the paper. Then we have the year, the biomedical mortality rate, the control mortality rate, and the difference between those two rates. You see there's a range here from negative 2.5, where the controls are actually higher than the bled crabs. And then some are 0, some are a little bit higher, including the one by DMF, Leshan in Korea from 2010. The study was done by DMF, and basically there was two things that tested out significantly in that study. One was whether the crab was bled or not, so it did increase the likelihood of mortality. The second factor that tested out significantly was which tank those crabs were randomly placed into. So when you're reporting the mortality rate from that paper, there's two factors: biomedical mortality and whatever is going wrong in their tanks. So that number is awfully high compared to other papers, probably for that reason. After that paper came out, there's a bit of a trust issue with biomedical firms. They didn't seem to want to work with some of the researchers. So they kind of guessed what the methods were, and in my opinion, they guessed wrong. So some of these more recent papers have some high mortality rates because they're using methods that aren't really accurate with what our methods really are. Right now, the review of existing biomedical mortality papers. We have the state horseshoe crab biologists from every state with biomedical fishery: Mass, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, and South Carolina are reviewing literature for consistency with state and biomedical regs. The idea is to provide guidance on mortality estimates for managers and guidance on biomedical methods for future researchers. There's another paper that doesn't look at mortality, but rather survival. That's Smith et al. From 2020. It looks at long-term survival of bled crabs. They took advantage of U.S. Fish and Wildlife tags. There's some companies in the Mid-Atlantic that bleed crabs, tag them, then let them go. So they took those returns from those crabs there and compared them to controls. Those controls are mostly spawning crabs that were tagged by conservation groups. The bled crabs in that study have a higher long-term survival rate than the bled crabs, but there's a caveat to that, as noted by the authors. The bled crabs and controls likely came from different segments of the population with different natural mortality rates. So what I take from this paper is not that bleeding the crab increases survival, rather that the biomedical mortality is less than the difference between those two rates of natural mortality between the two different groups. The crabs inshore on the spawning beaches were likely older than the crabs that were caught offshore and bled by the biomedical firms. Starting this summer, DMF will be starting a similar tagging study. In Massachusetts, we have a number of regulations for biomedical firms. You can't bleed a crab that's less than 7 inches in carapace width, or prosomal width rather. All bled crabs must be marked before release. As you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, there's a mark there. That mark changes annually, and each company has their own color that they apply to the crabs. Bleeding of marked crabs is prohibited. The crabs have to be transported between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, temperature of no more than 70 degrees in the lab. Containers can be no more than 2/3 full. Crabs have to be kept moist, a maximum of 36 hours out of the water. Holding containers of mobile gear fishers must be actively fed by seawater. And as of last year, there's an April 15th through June 7th harvest prohibition. So applying those regulations to those previous papers I showed before, the ones in red here violate at least one of our regulations. These are lined up based on mortality levels from 0% to 30%. And reported as the difference between the bled crabs and their controls. So there's a few papers that have 0% mortality or less, and then up to the Allison Leshan paper and Steve Correa paper, which had up to 27%. But that one did have an issue with their significant tank effect. The Kurtz and James Perry paper had a sample size of 10. There was 2 crabs that died from that. One was a month later, one was 2 months later. So it's possible that those crabs died for other reasons than the bleeding process. Most of these papers show the crabs will die a couple days after they're bled. The yellow dot in the center is the 50% assumed by ASMFC. This is for fisheries dependent monitoring. This is a Journal of Coastwide Biomedical Flowchart. Their crabs are collected either by hand or by draggers. They're either brought to the facility or in an in-water holding system, such as a pen. After that, they're brought to the labs, inspected. The ones that are healthy, not bleeding, alive, or bled. The ones that are injured, bleeding, or not healthy are rejected and held for a little bit. And they're all transported back to the water and released. DMF has been sampling the biomedical lab since 2000 and increased sampling in 2022. We now sample all stages, as you can see here in red. This was requested by conservation groups and the biomedical industry themselves. ASMFC requires mortality to be during the process be reported. That can be done by the industry reports or samples we collect at the state. We give both to ASMFC. This is from our biomedical sea sampling. In 2024, we did 7 sampling trips on 5 different boats. 4 different scientists participated. We sampled from July to November and sampled over 3,000 crabs. No crabs were observed dead in 2024 or 2023. For kept crabs, we sampled about 900 crabs, 0% mortality rate. Discarded crabs over 2,000, again, 0% mortality rate. For pen sampling, we did 7 different trips, 3 different locations, 4 different biologists participated. We sampled from July to October. We saw 2 dead crabs out of about 1,400 for a 0.1% mortality rate. There was fewer pens used by the industry in 2024, so there's fewer sampling trips. The percent mortality was down from 2023. It was 0.4, went down to 0.1. We did 11 sampling trips to the biomedical markets. There was 2 different locations we sampled, ACC and Charles River. 7 different biologists participated, sampled from July to November. Sampled over 2,400 crabs. There were 14 mortalities for a 0.6 mortality rate. All mortalities were observed on 2 trips, which happened back-to-back on July 10th and 11th. The mortality rates have been increasing. Prior to 2023, mortalities were rare, but it has been going up the last couple of years. There was 15 dead crabs observed in 2023 and 14 last year. It was still a relatively low rate. For release trips, we're on the boats when these guys are releasing the crabs. We did 10 sampling trips. 5 different scientists participated, sampled from July to November. Sampled nearly 2,000 crabs that were bled, had a 1.3% mortality rate. For crabs that were rejected during the process and not bled, but still released, there was a 0% mortality rate for those guys. Post-bleeding mortality tripled from 2023. It was 0.4 in 2023, went to 1.3 in 2024. 85% of all mortalities were from 1 sampling trip in July. So it seems to be somewhat episodic. So in 2024, pre-bleeding mortality was 0% for males, 1% for females. ASMFC would add 15% to that. So they would say 15% of males died and 60% of females died. From collection release, what we observed was 0.6 and 2.7 based on sex. That should be considered a floor because we do expect more crabs to die in the days after they're released. So the DMF observed mortality rate does not corroborate nor contradict the 50% used by ASMSC because we do expect more crabs to die in the next couple of days after they're released. But the 15% does appear to be high based on representative literature. So in 2024, we did a total of 48 sampling trips, sampling nearly 11,000 crabs. 9 different state biologists participated. DMF and DFG staff, from our seasonals to the commissioner of DFG, took tours of the biomedical facilities. Environmental police from the state of Massachusetts also inspected facilities. So there's a lot of eyes on this fishery. It's the 3rd most observed fishery in the state behind only groundfish and lobster. So to summarize, in Pleasant Bay, most evidence shows abundance is increasing, has the highest density of spawning crabs in the state, with an asterisk being of the sites that we actually survey. When accurately replicating biomedical methods, published mortality rates are low. DMF is dedicating a lot of effort in monitoring the biomedical industry. It's the 3rd most observed fishery in 2024. It was 2nd in 2023. Pre-bleeding mortality rates are fairly low, 0% for males, 1% for females. Post-bleeding mortality rates are also low, 0.6 for males, 1.7 for females. The data does not support the narrative that the biomedical process endangers crabs. So I'd like to thank the many dedicated volunteers with spawning surveys, especially Mass Audubon. They do the ones in the Outer Cape. The biomedical representatives that welcome us in their boats and labs, the commercial fishers for letting us sample their catch, the DMF staff for helping us collect data. If you'd like to help in 2025, please talk to Lorelei. It helps if we have more eyes on this fishery. So the more people we have out there, the more credible I think it is. So we like to take as many people as we possibly can to do these surveys. So if you'd like to help, talk to Lorelei. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Derek. One quick question. So I think you said it, but like the biomed release sampling, that only keeps track of basically, I would say, short-term mortality, and you don't track what happens after the release, right?
That basically, it's the ones that die basically right away, very close after they're bled, like within a few hours to several hours, or the next morning. So A lot of the studies have been done. For the most part, they'll die a day, 2 days, a couple days after that. So it's kind of rare to see the study from Pleasant Bay that had the mortality a month or 2 months after. Usually it's a couple days after, a few days after. So we're not tracking that. We don't see that. So our tagging studies will capture that, but what we're seeing at release will not capture that.
Cool. All right. If anyone has questions for Derek, either raise your hand or put something in the chat. Oh, someone's hand is up. Let's see whose hand is up.
Kelly.
Kelly.
Hi, Derek. Thanks. Great talk.
Kelly.
I was wondering how long it takes a horseshoe crab to replace that 30% blood volume.
So it kind of depends on the process of how you actually bleed the crabs, because some of the studies have been done, use varying methods, but usually it's about a couple weeks to a month.
Okay, thanks.
Couple of questions in the chat from Sandy and Nina. How much volume of blood is it per crab? Does it differ by crab size?
It does vary a bit. From what I've heard from the biomedical firms themselves, it does vary independent sometimes of size, but I don't have data on that myself, so I can't really speak to that.
And Wayne Castonguay has 2 questions. So unmute yourself, Wayne.
Yeah, is there an estimate of the percentage of adults that are blood each year?
Can't hear you, Wayne. Can you get closer to your mic?
How about now?
There you go.
Yeah.
Is there a percentage of an estimate of the percentage of adults that are bled each year?
We don't have that quite, but we do have the marking system, so we can see that from year to year and based on our recaptures. So it's something we could look at some point if we have a number of years and things like that. But at this point, we don't have that. No.
Great, thank you.
Kelly.
Sorry, one more. Just I know that the synthetics you brought up at the beginning, I was just wondering about I know it's been approved in other countries, but I guess what the US opinion is and what the status is on reviewing that and whether that's a path that's being considered or not. I mean, disregarding the change of administration at the moment.
So it's definitely being considered. It's being looked at now. Each of the companies that does this has a synthetic version. In my opinion, I think they all want that synthetic version approved and ready to go, because if you think about this whole process, they're trying to eliminate certain types of bacteria into their labs. The crabs are bringing those bacteria in. So it'd probably be much easier for them to have a synthetic version that doesn't have to deal with the live animals, doesn't get exposed to all the fishing regulations that we have and things like that. It makes it much more difficult. But to this point, the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, who approves those standards, has said it's not up to standards with LAL yet. So they're not quite there yet. They're working on it. We'll see when it happens. It's been rumored for a long time. It's just around the corner, but it has not happened yet. So we'll see. So beyond that, once it actually is approved, it also has to get a decent market share to replace LAL. So LAL will probably be around for a little bit longer, but we'll see how the synthetics go. But as Kelly said, it is approved in Europe and other spots, but just not in the United States.
Next question from Russ Brown. Does mortality rate vary along the coastline? Is it related to water temperature higher in the south end of the range?
So let me go back to those slides with the mortality estimates. So here, so there's a range of places these studies occur. Rudlow here is from Florida. This one's from South Carolina. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. And then some of these other ones are more local, like these ones here. Actually, all these ones over here on this end are all local. But I think there's a lot of issues with some of these papers based on methods and things. And the Watson paper had a 23% mortality rate at release, whereas we're seeing 0.3, 1.3, somewhere in that ballpark mortality at release. So it seemed awfully high. So it's a little confusing in that regard. But there does seem to be some kind of relationship with temperature based on what we see seasonality on our sampling. But it's not quite popping out yet because our samples are fairly low. We have to do more sampling.
Brent Hoffmeister.
Yes,
Right.
great. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So honestly, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. Number one, the 30% of blood being taken out of the crabs isn't necessarily accurate. I know it's repeated a lot in papers and whatnot, some of which have been peer reviewed, but the reality of it is it does vary greatly. It's not a measured volume, and there's a misconception that, you know, the biomedical industry targets females because they're bigger and give more blood. And the data would show you that that's not the case when you look at the ASMC data, number one. Number two, females are often laden with eggs, and they use their blood to keep those eggs alive. So in many cases, those large females don't give you any blood. If they're, you know, full of gravid with eggs, they don't give you a lot of blood. So there's a lot of misinformation there. And then regarding the synthetics, I just wanted to clarify that the synthetics are allowed to be in the United States, and there are companies that are using them. But because they're not considered equivalent, they require a lot of extra work in order to validate their use. I think it's important to remind people that, you know, the price of failure for endotoxin testing is human tragedy. So moving forward with these testing methods, it has to be very, very well vetted. And the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, the FDA, is not going to let any stone go unturned. So synthetics can be used. They are being used. They're not widely popular. The old original RFC, which you hear a lot of talk about, has one component of a multi-component cascade. There's new versions out there, RCR. 3 of the 4 biomedical companies each have an RCR, and we think that that's going to be the future. That has 3 components of the cascade. It's quicker, it's easier, and it can be used in current equipment. So Chapter 86 is going to be released, I think, in May this year by the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, and that's basically a roadmap for use. It's going to allow people to more easily use the synthetics. And to Derek's point, we do hope that this takes off and earns market share. The real difficulty that we see worldwide is that, let's say you're a manufacturer in Europe and you can use RFC or RCR in Europe, you can't sell it in the United States because the US FDA is different than the UK Pharmacopoeia, which is different than the Asian Pharmacopoeia. And before this stuff can be used around the world, we need to agree. There has to be harmonization between those regulatory agencies. So that's in the works as well. So that's all. I just want to clarify a couple of those points.
Brett, can you explain who you are?
I'm sorry. Brett Hoffmeister, I work with Associates Cape Cod. Currently the sustainability manager. I spent 22 years bleeding crabs and making LAL. So actively involved in the production of lysate and also chair of the advisory panel with the ASMFC. So we do a lot of work with the regulatory agencies, including DMF and ASMFC.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next question, Eric. Is there any work done to measure the impact of horseshoe crab harvest on red knots in Massachusetts?
So that has not been done in Massachusetts. My understanding, I'm not an ornithologist, so I'm kind of speaking outside my lane here. But from what I've seen in the past from published literature is that they're not really common here in the spring when the crabs are laying eggs. They're more common in the fall on their return trip down south. So they wouldn't necessarily overlap as much. So in this area, it's not really a huge factor, it seems.
Scott Schaefer asks, why is there so much misinformation about the biomedical HSC industry? Is it intentional? Why?
In my opinion, yes, it is intentional. There's a lot of people who do know what the data is. They go to a lot of meetings, see the data, but yet they report something totally different.
And Misty Ann Merrill has a question. Is mortality associated with the method or location of release after bleeding?
That's hard to say. We've had one company here for a long time, basically doing one method. We now have 2 companies with different methods. So we're seeing some differences there, but it's hard to say what it really is because we haven't sampled enough yet. So over time, I think those things will pop out, but they haven't quite done that yet.
And Wayne Castaway asks again, do crabs have to be released where they're caught? How close?
So if they're hand harvested, they're going back to the same embayment where they were caught. If they're drag or caught, it's the same general area, but we don't want them right on top of where they were caught. They kind of pushed off the side. So like there's a lot of harvesting in Nantucket Sound. So we don't want them right in the same spot they were caught. They're just adjacent to that, still within Nantucket Sound, but not quite in the same spot. We don't want them catching the same crabs over and over and over again.
Other questions? I don't see any. So let's end it there. And I want to thank Derek for taking time to give this presentation, and keep an eye out for an email for the next presentation in our seminar series. So you got lots of clapping hands, Derek. So
All right, thanks everyone.
all right, thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.